The sound of bone hitting metal cut through the cabin before anyone understood what they were hearing. A dull crack, followed by a woman gasping for air as she collapsed sideways into the aisle. Coffee sloshed, a cart slammed into a seat, and for half a second the entire plane froze, trapped between disbelief and terror. The man standing over her did not shout. He did not need to. His size alone filled the space. Broad shoulders under a dark jacket, close-cropped hair streaked with grey, a face carved by years that had not been kind. He looked down at the flight attendant on the floor like she was something that had broken by accident. "Stay down," he said, calm, almost bored. People obeyed before they realized they were obeying. Flight Western Skies 817 had left Dallas just after sunrise, bound for San Diego. A routine domestic flight, 4 hours. Coffee, newspapers folded at crossword puzzles, retirees heading west to escape winter, a few veterans by the look of their posture. 2 businessmen arguing quietly about real estate in Phoenix. The kind of flight people took without thinking, trusting the system, the way Americans had been taught to trust it for decades. That trust evaporated in under a minute. The woman on the floor was named Margaret Ellis, 41 years old. Brown hair pulled back too tight, lines at the corners of her eyes that came from years of smiling on command. She did not cry out. Her palms pressed against the carpet as she rolled slightly, instinctively protecting her head, distributing the impact. It was subtle, too subtle. Only a handful of eyes noticed. Most people were staring at the man with the gun, now visible at his side, or at the younger one, blocking the aisle near the rear, blade held low and steady, like he knew exactly how close he needed to be to cut without killing. "Everyone stay seated," the man said, projecting his voice without raising it. "We are not here to hurt anyone who follows instructions." He glanced toward the cockpit door. "That depends on your captain." Inside the cockpit, the captain lay slumped against his seat, blood running into his eyebrow. The first officer sat rigid, hands shaking, eyes fixed forward as if staring hard enough might rewind the last 60 seconds. The cockpit door was closed now, locked, not by the pilots. In the cabin, breathing grew loud. A woman in the aisle seat of row 7 clutched her husband's arm so tightly her knuckles went white. A man near the window stared straight ahead, lips moving in silent prayer. Somewhere toward the back, a child began to cry, sharp and thin, the sound cutting through everything else. The younger hijacker snapped his head toward it, irritation flashing across his face. "Quiet!" he barked, pointing. The mother froze, pressing her hand over the boy's mouth, whispering apologies to no one in particular. Margaret pushed herself to her knees, slowly, deliberately. She kept her eyes down, her breathing shallow, shoulders rounded inward, the posture of someone who had learned long ago that appearing small could sometimes keep you alive. The man watched her for a moment longer than necessary. There was calculation there. Not cruelty for its own sake, but assessment. He nodded once. "Get up," he said, "and get back to work. You're going to help keep everyone calm." "Yes, sir," Margaret said. Her voice was steady. That, too, was subtle. Too steady. She rose without using the seat for leverage, found her balance immediately, despite the slight vibration of the aircraft. When she reached the galley, her hands shook just enough to look right. From row 12, a man named Harold Benton noticed everything. 70 years old, retired aircraft mechanic, Vietnam-era Air Force. He had spent his life listening to engines and watching people under pressure. The way Margaret moved did not match the fear in her eyes. It was like watching someone play a role they knew too well. His stomach tightened, not with hope, but with recognition. Recognition was dangerous. It meant expectations. Up front, the man with the gun spoke into a satellite phone, his tone clipped, professional. Demands, timelines, proof of life. He knew the language. He had done this before. When he finished, he gestured toward the cabin. "We'll need the message recorded," he said to the younger one. "Use the flight attendant. People trust uniforms." Margaret felt it land like a weight in her chest. She had spent years making herself invisible inside that uniform. Now, it was being used as a weapon. As she moved down the aisle, collecting empty cups that no one had drunk from, she caught fragments of faces. Fear, anger, shame. A man in a veteran's cap stared at his hands, jaw clenched, reliving something he had sworn was behind him. A woman in her late 60s mouthed the words of a hymn Margaret recognized from her childhood, the cadence steadying her breath. In row 9, a pregnant woman sat perfectly still, both hands over her belly, eyes wide and unblinking, as if movement itself might provoke disaster. Margaret paused just long enough to meet her gaze. No words, just a look. Hold on. In the galley, Margaret gripped the edge of the counter until the metal bit into her palm. Her reflection stared back at her in the brushed steel. Older than she felt, younger than she expected. The past pressed close, unwelcome and familiar. She had promised herself she would never make this choice again. Promised she would be done deciding who lived and who didn't. But promises made in quiet rooms never accounted for screaming children and loaded guns at 35,000 feet. The younger hijacker shoved a phone toward her. "Read what I tell you," he said. His hands trembled. Not fear, adrenaline, unstable, dangerous. Margaret took the phone. She looked into the camera and let her shoulders sag, let her eyes glass over. She knew exactly how this would look. A tired woman, frightened, compliant. The words came out soft, broken in the right places. She spoke of cooperation, of safety, of consequences. Somewhere behind the lens, a federal agent would be listening, parsing every syllable. She gave them nothing. When it was over, the man nodded, satisfied. "Good," he said. "You're good at this." She handed the phone back and turned away before he could see the truth flicker across her face. Because the truth was simple and terrible. This was not going to end with negotiation. It never did. And if she waited any longer, the cost would be measured in bodies. As she walked back into the cabin, turbulence rippled through the plane, sudden and sharp. Passengers cried out, bags shifted. One of the hijackers stumbled, grabbing a seat for balance. Margaret did not. Her knees bent slightly, absorbing the motion, her body reacting before thought. Harold Benton's breath caught. There it was again. The thing he could not unsee. Margaret felt eyes on her. Too many, too focused. She kept moving, heart pounding now, not with fear, but with timing. Timing was everything. She had learned that the hard way. Somewhere deep inside the aircraft, beneath the noise and panic and prayers, something else was building. Pressure. Momentum. The fragile calm of a room full of people who had not yet realized they were standing at the edge of a decision that would change all of them. And at the center of it, a woman everyone thought they understood, carrying a past that refused to stay buried, knowing that once she moved, there would be no way back. The first scream came from the back of the plane, sharp and involuntary, ripped loose when the turbulence dropped the floor out from under everyone's feet. It lasted less than a second before the younger hijacker spun and slammed his palm against the overhead bin, the impact echoing like a warning shot. Silence followed, thick and immediate. The kind of silence that wasn't calm, but coerced. Margaret Ellis felt the vibration through her shoes. Not the turbulence, the fear. It moved differently, chaotic, uneven. She adjusted her pace without thinking, slowed just enough to look harmless, fast enough not to invite attention. The aisle felt narrower now, bodies angled inward, shoulders hunched, eyes tracking every movement that wasn't their own. A floating cage at 35,000 feet. At the front of the cabin, the man with the gun sat in a first-class seat turned sideways, elbow resting on the armrest like he belonged there. His name, though no one on the plane knew it, was Daniel Cross, late 40s, former intelligence contractor. The kind of man who spoke softly because he had learned people listened harder that way. He watched the cabin the way a chess player watched a board, already several moves ahead. Margaret was a variable he hadn't planned for. Not yet. Variables made him uncomfortable. "Coffee," he said as she passed. Not a request, an assertion of control. "Yes, sir," Margaret replied, already reaching for the pot. Her hand shook again, just enough. She hated herself for how good she was at this. She poured. The smell bloomed, rich and grounding, absurd in the middle of a hijacking. Daniel Cross leaned closer as she set the cup down. "You're very calm," he said casually. "Most people aren't." Margaret kept her eyes lowered. "Training," she said. "We're taught to keep passengers calm." He smiled at that, not kindly. "That's so." Behind him, the cockpit door remained closed, locked. Whatever conversation was happening inside that confined space was being swallowed whole by the hum of the engines. The man guarding the door shifted his stance, blade angled inward, blocking the narrow corridor. He was younger than Cross, early 30s, strong, nervous. The dangerous kind of nervous that came from wanting to prove something. In row 12, Harold Benton adjusted in his seat, the old ache in his knees flaring as his muscles tensed. He told himself to relax. He was not young anymore. This was not his fight. He had buried enough friends already. But his eyes kept drifting back to the flight attendant, the way her shoulders squared when she thought no one was looking, the way she positioned herself between the aisle and the passengers without appearing to do so. He recognized the instinct. You didn't unlearn it. You only buried it. Margaret moved toward the back, offering water no one wanted. She caught fragments of whispered conversation, a woman murmuring her daughter's name like a mantra, a man asking God for forgiveness in advance, someone else muttering that the government would handle it, that help was coming. The faith in that statement was fragile, almost desperate. When she reached row 9 again, the pregnant woman looked up at her, eyes glossy, breath shallow. "Is he serious?" she whispered, barely audible. "Are they really going to?" Margaret crouched slightly, bringing herself level without drawing attention. "I don't know," she said honestly. "But right now, the safest thing you can do is breathe with me." She inhaled slowly, exaggerated the movement just enough to be mirrored. The woman followed, shaky at first, then steadier. Margaret nodded once and stood. It wasn't comfort, it was containment. Sometimes that was all you could offer. As she turned, she caught the eye of the man in the veteran's cap across the aisle. Thomas Reed, 72, Marine Corps, retired. His jaw was clenched, hands fisted in his lap. He gave the smallest shake of his head. "Don't." She answered with an even smaller nod. "Not yet." The younger hijacker's voice cut through the cabin. "Phones, all of them, now!" He moved fast, collecting devices in a plastic bag, the clatter of glass and metal sounding like a countdown. When one man hesitated, fumbling with a flip phone like it might save him, the blade appeared inches from his throat. Compliance followed instantly. The bag grew heavy. Margaret watched the sweep from the galley. She memorized patterns, timing, who moved first, who hesitated, who looked at the floor, and who watched the hijackers when they thought no one noticed. The plane was full of people. Only a few were thinking. Daniel Cross finished his coffee and set the cup down deliberately. "We'll need another update," he said, standing. "Proof that everyone's alive." His gaze slid back to Margaret. "You'll do." Her stomach tightened. She nodded anyway. As he positioned the phone again, a low thump reverberated through the aircraft. Not turbulence, something else. A sound felt more than heard. The cockpit door rattled once, then stilled. Cross's head snapped up. His eyes hardened. "What was that?" the younger one asked. Cross held up a hand, listened. Nothing followed. He exhaled slowly. "Probably the captain shifting," he said. "Keep moving." Margaret raised the phone and began to speak. Her voice broke in all the right places. Fear, carefully measured. The words spilled out, rehearsed and empty, a script meant to buy time. As she spoke, she caught sight of her own reflection in the dark screen. For a split second, the mask slipped. Just enough. And she saw it there. The person she had spent years trying to forget. When the recording ended, Cross took the phone and turned away. "Good," he said again. "You're useful." The word landed harder than the blow earlier. Useful. She had been that once. Too useful. It had cost her everything. As Cross moved back toward the cockpit, the younger hijacker blocked Margaret's path with an outstretched arm. "You," he said quietly. "You almost looked brave back there." Her pulse spiked. Not outwardly. Inside. She kept her face blank. "I was scared," she said. He smiled, thin and mean. "You should be." He stepped aside, letting her pass. The threat lingered. Margaret returned to the galley and pressed her forehead briefly against the cool metal. The plane surged again, a gentle roll this time. She felt the shift before it happened. Muscle memory. She hated that, too. Harold Benton watched her from his seat, heart pounding now. He had seen men freeze under fire. He had seen others crack. What he was seeing now was something else entirely. A woman carrying a war inside her, fighting it with everything she had, knowing the next decision would strip her bare. In the cockpit, the first officer's hands shook as he adjusted the autopilot. Sweat ran down his spine. He did not know how much longer the captain would last. He did not know if help would arrive in time. He did know one thing, clear as a bell. Whatever happened next was not going to follow any checklist he had ever memorized. Back in the cabin, the air felt heavier. Not just with fear, with anticipation. People sensed it, even if they couldn't name it. Something was coming. A shift. A reckoning. Margaret straightened, smoothed her uniform, and stepped back into the aisle. Her heart hammered now, loud enough she was sure someone would hear it. She met Harold Benton's eyes again. This time, she didn't look away. He swallowed, gave a single, solemn nod. She took a breath. Long, controlled. The kind that came before action, not panic. Whatever happened next, there would be no more pretending. No more hiding behind a name and a uniform that no longer fit. Somewhere above them, the sky stretched on, indifferent. And inside the narrow aluminum tube hurtling through it, a choice was crystallizing, sharp and unavoidable, waiting for the moment when fear would no longer be enough to hold it back. The plane lurched again, not hard enough to trigger screams this time, but enough to make every loose thought slide toward panic. The seatbelt sign chimed uselessly, a polite sound in a place where politeness had already died. Daniel Cross stood in the aisle, one hand braced against a seatback, eyes scanning faces. He wasn't looking for rebellion. He was looking for resolve. Resolve was rarer. Resolve was dangerous. Margaret Ellis felt the shift before it finished. Her knees bent, weight settling low, spine aligned. She corrected herself a fraction of a second later, forcing stiffness into her posture, reminding her body where it was supposed to be now. Commercial cabin, not a cockpit, not a war zone. Not anymore. The lie tasted bitter. "Everyone sit still," Cross said. "This aircraft is under control." His voice carried authority without anger. That was deliberate. Anger provoked resistance. Calm bred compliance. In row 4, A man in his late 60s leaned toward his wife and whispered something she couldn't quite hear. His hands shook as he folded them together, knuckles cracking softly. 2 rows back, a woman closed her eyes and pressed her lips together, as if sealing a door inside herself. These were not cowards. Margaret could see that clearly. These were people who had lived long enough to know when a situation was bigger than them. The younger hijacker returned from the rear, bag of phones slung over his shoulder. "All clear?" he muttered. His eyes flicked to Margaret again, lingering. There was curiosity there now, suspicion starting to itch. Daniel Cross noticed. He followed the look, then smiled faintly. "She's fine," he said. "She knows how to follow orders." Margaret lowered her gaze. Useful. Fine. Words that erased a person without killing them. From the cockpit came a muffled sound. Not a voice. A scrape. Metal against metal. Cross's head snapped up again. This time he didn't mask it fast enough. The younger man stiffened, blade lifting instinctively. "Stay here," Cross said, already moving. He stopped at the cockpit door, pressed his ear to it. Silence. Too much silence. Inside, the first officer's heart hammered so hard he was sure it would give him away. The captain was still breathing, shallow, uneven. Blood crusted dark at his temple. The first officer had tried to help, tried to remember training, but his hands wouldn't stop shaking. Every sound outside the door felt like a clock ticking down. Cross stepped back from the door. His jaw tightened. He turned slowly, eyes narrowing as they swept the cabin. When they landed on Margaret, something sharpened behind them. Not certainty, instinct. "Come here," he said. Margaret's pulse jumped. She walked toward him, steps measured, face blank. When she reached the front, he leaned in, lowering his voice. "You've been on this route a long time?" "Yes, sir." "Ever see turbulence like this?" "Yes, sir." Another pause. He studied her hands, the way they rested. Too still. "Where'd you work before this?" he asked casually. She didn't hesitate. "Customer support. Phoenix. Call center." He nodded, as if filing it away. "That explains it. You know how to take abuse." The younger hijacker snorted softly. "She does that real well." Margaret kept her eyes down. But inside, something flared. Not anger. Recognition. This was the moment the dynamic shifted, when predators tested the edges. Cross straightened. "We're going to need you again," he said. "Passengers are getting restless. Go remind them what happens when people get ideas." Margaret turned back toward the cabin. Each step felt heavier now, the air thickening with something unsaid. She passed Harold Benton again. His jaw was tight, eyes hard. He gave a tiny shake of his head. Still not yet. She didn't respond. 2 rows behind him, Thomas Reed shifted in his seat, muscles coiling unconsciously. He caught Margaret's eye for the briefest second. The look he gave her wasn't pleading. It was a question. Are you going to do something or not? She looked away. The younger hijacker followed her halfway down the aisle, close enough that she could smell the chemical edge on his breath. He stopped beside row 9. The pregnant woman flinched. "Stand up," he said to her. "No," the woman whispered, hands tightening over her stomach. Her husband started to rise. The blade flashed. Margaret stepped between them without thinking. "Please," she said, voice soft but firm. "She's pregnant. Stress could hurt the baby." The hijacker's smile was immediate and cruel. "You care about her," he said. "That's sweet." Cross's voice cut in from the front. "Enough! Sit her back down." Then, to Margaret, "You, with me." The younger man hesitated, disappointment flickering across his face, then obeyed. Margaret felt the eyes of the cabin on her as Cross guided her toward the galley. Not fear now. Expectation.
That was worse. The curtain slid closed behind them. The galley felt smaller than it had before. Cross leaned against the counter, arms crossed, studying her like a puzzle he hadn't meant to solve yet. "You keep putting yourself in the middle," he said quietly. "That's not smart. I was just trying to help. Help gets people killed." He stepped closer. Margaret felt the familiar narrowing of focus, the world sharpening around him. Her body wanted to move, to strike, to end this before it spread. She forced herself still. "You know," Cross continued, "I've been doing this a long time. People either freeze or they break. You're doing neither." "I'm scared," she said. He smiled again. "No, you're not." The curtain rustled. The younger hijacker's voice drifted in. "We got a problem." Cross turned. "What kind?" "The old guy, the Marine. He's whispering." Cross's smile vanished. He moved fast, shoving the curtain aside. The aisle exploded into motion. The younger man lunged toward Thomas Reed. A businessman reached out instinctively and got shoved back hard. Someone screamed. Margaret stepped out behind Cross, heart slamming now, not with fear, but with timing finally snapping into place. This was it. The moment when control fractured, when chaos bloomed. The younger hijacker grabbed Thomas by the collar, hauling him halfway out of his seat. "You want to be a hero," he snarled. "Stop," Margaret said. Both men turned. Cross's eyes locked onto hers. For the first time, there was no doubt there, only calculation. "You," he said slowly. "Get back." Thomas coughed, struggling for breath. The blade pressed closer to his throat. The pregnant woman sobbed quietly. Harold Benton's hands clenched so hard, his nails bit into his palms. Margaret took one step forward, then another. Cross raised his gun. The cabin went dead still. "This is your last warning," Cross said. "Sit down." Margaret looked past the barrel, into his eyes. She saw it then. Not evil. Fatigue. The weight of choices made long ago and justified every day since. Men like him didn't stop because they were convinced. They stopped because they were stopped. She lowered her hands slowly. "Okay," she said. Cross exhaled, satisfied. The younger hijacker loosened his grip slightly. Thomas sagged back into his seat, gasping. The blade withdrew an inch. Margaret turned away, walked back toward the galley. Every muscle in her body screamed. The window was closing. She felt it. One more mistake, and someone would die. Behind her, Harold Benton closed his eyes. Thomas Reed stared at the floor, shame burning hot in his chest. The pregnant woman clutched her belly and rocked silently. The plane flew on, engine steady, sky vast and uncaring. Margaret reached the galley and rested her hand against the counter. Her fingers trembled now, for real. She let them, for 3 seconds. Then she straightened. There would be no perfect opening, no clean solution. There never was. Only a choice, and the cost that followed. The choice did not arrive like a thunderclap. It crept in quietly, settling behind Margaret Ellis's ribs, heavy and immovable, the way inevitability always did. She had learned long ago that the moment you recognized it, the moment you named it, you were already late. She moved back into the aisle with a tray she did not need, performing the motions by muscle memory alone. Pour, wipe, nod. The cabin smelled of stale coffee and recycled air, and fear that had begun to sour. Fear changed when it stayed too long. It thickened. It turned inward. People stopped shaking and started thinking. Thinking was what broke plans.
Daniel Cross felt it too. He paced now instead of sitting. Short steps, controlled. A man managing his own impatience. He glanced at his watch, then at the ceiling, as if he could see through aluminum and cloud to the satellites above them. Negotiations were not going the way he wanted. They never did when the clock stretched.
"Listen up," he said, stopping mid-aisle. His voice cut clean through the murmurs. "We are going to make something very clear." He gestured to the younger hijacker. "Bring him." The younger man moved fast, yanking Thomas Reed out of his seat again. This time, there was no warning. Thomas grunted as his bad knee caught the armrest. He stumbled forward, breath ragged, eyes blazing with a mix of pain and fury that belonged to another lifetime. "Sit down," Cross said to the cabin. "Every one of you." He waited until compliance rippled outward, seat by seat. "Good. Now pay attention." Margaret felt her heart slam once, hard. This was escalation, not random, deliberate. She edged closer without appearing to, angling her body just enough to block the sightline of the pregnant woman in row 9. "This man," Cross continued, one hand gripping Thomas's shoulder, "thought he could inspire something." He smiled thinly. He was wrong. Thomas spat on the floor. It was a small thing, a human thing. The younger hijacker reacted instantly, fist slamming into Thomas's ribs. The sound was wet, final. Thomas folded with a sharp cry he tried and failed to swallow. Margaret moved before thought caught up. One step, then another. "Stop," she said. The word fell into the aisle like dropped glass. Cross turned slowly, his eyes locked on her. Not surprised, not angry, assessing. "You're persistent," he said. She could feel the cabin watching now, a collective intake of breath. This was no longer invisible. This was confrontation. "He's old," Margaret said. Her voice held, low and even. "He's not a threat." "You've already made your point." Cross tilted his head. "Have I?" The younger hijacker shifted, blade pressing harder into Thomas's side. Thomas wheezed, hands clawing at empty air. Harold Benton half rose from his seat before his wife grabbed his arm, eyes wet and pleading. "Don't. Please don't." Margaret felt something crack. Not loud. Internal. A line she had been walking along finally giving way. "You don't need him," she said. "Use me." The cabin inhaled as one. Cross blinked once. Then he laughed softly. "You," he said. "Why would I do that?" "Because I won't fight you," Margaret replied. "Because I won't scream. Because you already know I'll do what you say." That was the lie, and the truth braided together so tightly, even she could barely separate them. Cross studied her for a long moment. He saw what he wanted to see. Compliance, control, a cleaner demonstration. He nodded. "Fair trade." The younger hijacker released Thomas and shoved Margaret forward. Hard. She stumbled, caught herself, felt the familiar sting as her shoulder clipped a seat frame. Pain bloomed. Real. Useful. "Take her," Cross said. "Galley." As the curtain slid shut behind them, the cabin erupted in sound. Not screams. Whispers, gasps, a woman sobbing openly now. Thomas Reed slumped back into his seat, face grey, eyes burning with helpless rage. Harold Benton stared at the closed curtain, his chest tight, a familiar sickness crawling up his spine. He had seen this before. Not here, not now, but he knew where it led. Inside the galley, the younger hijacker shoved Margaret against the counter. Her breath whooshed out of her lungs. Metal dug into her back. He leaned in close, grin wide, eyes bright and unfocused. "You like playing protector," he said. "Let's see how that works out for you." She tasted blood. copper. The world narrowed, sharpened. She catalogued without thinking. Distance, angle, his grip, his balance slightly forward, sloppy, overconfident. Daniel Cross stood back, arms folded. He did not look away. He wanted to see. Margaret raised her hands slowly. "Please," she said. Her voice shook now, for real this time. "I didn't mean to cause trouble." The younger man laughed. He lifted his hand to strike. That was the mistake. Margaret moved. Not fast, not wild. Efficient. Her left foot slid back, hooking his ankle. Her weight dropped. Her right hand came up, not to block, but to redirect, catching his wrist and twisting just enough. The motion was small, almost invisible. His balance went first, then his certainty. He hit the floor hard, the impact knocking the air from his lungs in a wet gasp. For half a second, no one moved. Margaret stepped back, hands flying to her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. You startled me." "I didn't mean to." Cross's eyes were locked on her. Narrow, sharp. He had seen it. All of it. The timing, the control. The lie layered perfectly over truth. The younger hijacker groaned, trying to push himself up. Cross lifted a hand. "Stay down." The man froze, confusion flickering across his face. Cross stepped closer to Margaret. The space between them shrank until she could smell gun oil and sweat. "That wasn't an accident," he said quietly. Margaret's breath came fast now. She shook her head. "I took a class," she said. "Self-defense. Last year." Cross smiled, not amused. "No, you didn't." He leaned in, voice dropping. "Who are you?" For the first time since this began, Margaret had no immediate answer. Not because she didn't know, because saying it would make it real. Before she could respond, the curtain rustled. A shape filled the opening. The other hijacker. Older than the one on the floor, smarter. He took in the scene in a heartbeat. "What happened?" he asked. "She tripped him," Cross said. He never took his eyes off Margaret. The older man frowned, unconvinced, but he didn't push. Not yet. Cross straightened. "Enough," he said. "This is getting messy." He gestured toward Margaret. "Back to work. And don't test me again." He leaned in one last time. "Next time, I won't be curious." Margaret nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks now, unforced and humiliating. He turned away, satisfied. The curtain opened. She stepped back into the cabin. The eyes on her were different now. No longer just fear. Something else. Awe. Suspicion. Hope. All of it dangerous. She moved down the aisle on unsteady legs. Her shoulder throbbed. Her ribs screamed with each breath. She welcomed it. Pain anchored her, kept her present. Harold Benton watched her pass. Their eyes met. He saw it now, clear as day. The thing he had hoped he was wrong about. He nodded once. Not encouragement. Recognition. Margaret reached the rear galley and gripped the counter, knuckles white. Her reflection stared back at her again. Mask cracked. Control slipping. This was no longer about staying hidden. This was about finishing what she had started. And she knew, with cold certainty, that Daniel Cross knew it too. The plane did not feel smaller until Margaret realized she was running out of time. Not minutes. Decisions. The kind that closed doors behind them. She stayed in the rear galley longer than she should have, counting breaths, letting the shaking in her hands pass without forcing it away. The pain in her shoulder radiated down her arm in a steady throb. It was real. It grounded her. She flexed her fingers slowly, once, twice, testing range of motion.
Good enough. Out in the cabin, the soundscape had changed. No crying now, no whispered prayers. Just a low, collective murmur, like a crowd holding itself back from a cliff edge. Fear had settled into something heavier. Resentment. Waiting. Daniel Cross felt it too. He stood near the front, one hand resting casually on the seat back, gun visible but not raised. He spoke into the satellite phone again, voice controlled, clipped. Negotiations were dragging. He hated delays. Delays bred uncertainty. Uncertainty made people improvise. 2 hours, he said into the phone. After that, we changed the conversation. He ended the call and scanned the cabin. His eyes landed briefly on Margaret as she re-entered the aisle. They lingered, measuring. Everyone listen, Cross announced. We're going to reset the mood. He nodded to the older hijacker, the one who had not yet made a mistake. Bring the doctor. A man in his early 60s was pulled from his seat near the middle. Grey hair, wire-frame glasses, hands already lifted in instinctive compliance. Dr. Alan Morris, retired trauma surgeon, judging by the way his eyes tracked Cross's stance, the gun, the distance to the nearest passenger. I can help people, Morris said quickly. If anyone's hurt. You will, Cross replied. That depends on how cooperative you are. Margaret felt a cold line form in her chest. This was not random selection. Cross was narrowing options, removing variables. A surgeon was leverage, a tool. Captain's not doing well, Cross continued, loud enough for the cabin to hear. You're going to look at him. If he lives, we all benefit. If he doesn't, he let the sentence die. Morris swallowed. I'll do what I can. You'll do exactly what we say. The cockpit door opened just long enough to let them through. Margaret watched from the aisle as Morris disappeared inside, with one hijacker at his back. The door closed again. Locked. The first officer's face flashed in her mind. Pale. Desperate. Alone with an unconscious captain and a ticking clock. The younger hijacker, the one she had tripped, hovered near the galley now. His movements were tighter, controlled. Humiliated men were dangerous men. He kept glancing at Margaret, jaw clenched, eyes sharp with unfinished business. You embarrassed me, he muttered as she passed. She didn't respond. In row 9, the pregnant woman's breathing had gone shallow again. Her husband rubbed her back in slow circles, whispering reassurances he didn't believe himself. Margaret paused, offered water. The woman's fingers trembled as she took it. You're bleeding, the woman whispered, eyes flicking to Margaret's sleeve. Margaret followed her gaze. A dark stain had spread along the seam of her uniform. She hadn't noticed. It's nothing, she said. The woman shook her head. You shouldn't have to do this. Margaret met her eyes. For a moment, she let the truth show. Just enough. I know. At the front, Cross paced again. His patience was thinning. He stopped near Thomas Reed, who sat hunched now, one hand pressed to his ribs, breathing shallow. Cross crouched slightly, bringing himself eye level. You still feel like a hero? He asked. Thomas didn't answer. He stared back, defiant even now. Cross smiled faintly and stood. We'll come back to you. That was when the plane dipped again. Not turbulence, a controlled descent. Subtle, but unmistakable to anyone who had spent time in the air. Margaret felt it instantly. Her stomach dropped. Her eyes flicked toward the cockpit door. So did Cross's. What's happening? The younger hijacker snapped. Cross didn't answer. He moved fast this time, striding to the cockpit door and pounding once. Report! Inside, Dr. Morris's voice was tight but steady. The captain's bleeding internally. He needs immediate medical attention. He's not stable. And the first officer? Cross demanded. "He's flying," Morris said. "Barely." Cross closed his eyes for a fraction of a second. This was not part of the plan. A dead captain complicated everything. A barely functioning first officer made it worse. Margaret watched him recalibrate in real time. He turned back to the cabin, face set. "New rules," he said. "Nobody moves, nobody speaks. We're landing somewhere else." The word landed like a blow. Landing meant exposure, variables, eyes, guns on the tarmac. The younger hijacker stiffened. That wasn't the deal. Cross rounded on him. "I make the deals." Tension snapped tight, stretched thin enough to cut. Margaret felt it in her bones. This was the fracture point, when men turned on each other, when control slipped. She shifted her weight, subtly positioning herself closer to the galley equipment. Fire extinguisher, med kit, hard edges, limited space. She catalogued without looking. Ola Benton caught the movement. His heart pounded. He followed her line of sight, understanding dawning. He leaned back, pulling his wife close, whispering something she didn't hear. In the cockpit, the first officer wiped sweat from his eyes with the back of his hand. His voice cracked as he spoke into the intercom, trying to keep it neutral. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated. We are experiencing a medical situation." Margaret closed her eyes for half a second. Medical situation. If only it were that simple. Cross turned back toward the cabin, gun rising slightly now. "We're running out of goodwill," he said. "And when that happens, people get hurt." He looked directly at Margaret. "You," he said. "Front. Now." Her pulse spiked, sharp and clean. This was it. No more positioning, no more waiting. She stepped forward, every nerve lit. Behind her, the cabin held its breath, because everyone felt it now. The moment tipping, the fragile order about to shatter. And somewhere deep beneath fear and noise and the hum of engines, something older and harder was waking up inside Margaret Ellis. She walked toward Daniel Cross without lowering her eyes, and for the first time, he did not look certain at all. Daniel Cross waited until Margaret was 2 steps away before lowering his voice. "You have a way of being where problems start," he said. "I don't like coincidences." Margaret stopped at arm's length, close enough to smell the leather of his jacket, the faint metallic tang of gun oil. Her breathing slowed, deliberately. She kept her hands visible, fingers relaxed. Non-threatening. That was the costume. It always was. "I'm just doing my job," she said. Cross studied her face. Not the eyes this time. The jaw, the throat. Micro-tensions most people never learned to read. "Your job is pouring coffee," he said. "What you just did back there was something else." Behind him, the younger hijacker shifted, impatience radiating off him. He wanted something loud, something final. Cross wanted quiet control. That difference mattered. "Turn around," Cross said. Margaret did. Slowly. She felt the cabin lean forward with her, every passenger pulled by the gravity of the moment. The gun pressed lightly between her shoulder blades, not enough to bruise, enough to remind. "Walk," Cross said. They moved toward the front galley. Each step felt measured, intentional, like walking onto a stage she had sworn never to set foot on again. The curtain closed behind them. The world shrank. Cross gestured to the jump seat. "Sit." She sat. He leaned against the opposite counter, gun down but present. "I don't believe in miracles," he said. "I believe in preparation. And you're prepared." Margaret said nothing. "I've worked with soldiers," Cross continued. "Real ones. The kind who don't talk about it afterward. You have the same eyes." Her pulse beat once, hard. She kept her face still. I also know when someone's afraid, he said. You're not. Not the way they are. He tilted his head toward the cabin. You're afraid of something else. Silence stretched. The hum of the engines filled it, constant and indifferent. You want to know who I am, Margaret said finally. Cross smiled thinly. I already know what you are. I'm deciding what to do with you. In the cockpit, Dr. Morris worked with shaking hands, pressing gauze, monitoring breath, whispering encouragement to a man who could not hear him. The first officer's voice crackled through the intercom again, softer now, less composed. He was losing altitude. He was losing time. Cross tapped his watch. We're changing destinations, he said. A short runway, fewer surprises. That will kill him, Margaret said. Cross looked up sharply. Excuse me. The captain, she said. You divert. You risk pressure changes. Stress. He won't make it. Cross stared at her. The smallest beat passed. Then another. You sound very sure. I am. And how would you know? This was the edge. She felt it clearly now. One step forward meant everything behind her burned. The uniform, the anonymity, the quiet life built carefully, deliberately, like a barricade against memory. She lifted her eyes to his. Because I've been in cockpits like that before. The words settled between them, heavy and irrevocable. Cross didn't move. His gaze sharpened, pupils contracting. Say that again. I've been in cockpits under pressure, she said, with injured pilots, with alarms screaming. I know what happens next. The gun rose a fraction. Outside the galley, the younger hijacker paced, restless. He hated this pause. Pauses meant thinking. Thinking meant doubt. You're telling me you're a pilot, Cross said. Margaret nodded once. A commercial pilot, he said. No. Another beat. Cross's smile vanished completely. Military. Yes. How long? Long enough. He exhaled through his nose, a sound like restrained laughter. You hid well. I wasn't hiding, she said. I left. That's not the same thing. Cross stepped closer. The gun lowered. Not trust. Recalculation. If you're lying, he said, I'll know. I'm not. He studied her again, this time differently. Respect crept in, unwelcome and dangerous. Then you understand leverage, he said. You understand consequences. I do. Good, Cross said. Then you understand why I can't let you do anything. Margaret felt the old anger stir. Controlled, cold. You already have, she said. Every time you pulled me forward, every time you made me speak, you put me in the center. Cross's eyes flicked to the curtain, to the cabin beyond, the audience he could no longer fully control. You want me out of the way, Margaret said. Then keep me here. But if you want this plane on the ground with people alive, you listen to me. The engines changed pitch. Subtle, but unmistakable. Cross turned toward the cockpit door. He hesitated, just long enough. That was when the younger hijacker burst in, face flushed. We've got movement, he said. Someone in the back tried to stand. I shoved him down, but a crash echoed from the cabin, a tray hitting the floor, a woman crying out. Panic finally spilling over. Cross swore under his breath. Control was slipping faster now. Stay here, he told Margaret. Then he stopped, reconsidered. No, come with me. They stepped back into the aisle together. The cabin was in disarray, not chaos, not yet, but the seams were showing. Thomas Reed was half out of a seat again, pain etched deep into his face. Harold Benton stood beside him, one arm braced protectively. Others had turned, watching, ready to either help or freeze. The moment teetered. "Sit down," Cross shouted. This time, the authority cracked. Margaret felt it ripple through the room. She raised her voice, cutting cleanly through the noise. "Everyone, sit! Now!" It wasn't loud, it wasn't panicked. It carried weight. People obeyed. Cross turned toward her sharply, their eyes locked.
The realization landed fully now. "You're going to get us killed," he said. "No," she replied. "I'm trying to stop you from doing it." The younger hijacker lifted his blade, furious. "She's playing you." Cross hesitated. That hesitation cost him. The first officer's voice burst through the intercom, raw and breaking. "We're losing him," he said. "If anyone on board has flight experience, I need you, now." The cabin erupted. Voices, movement, hope and fear colliding. Margaret stepped forward. "I do," she said. Every eye turned to her. Cross raised the gun, hand shaking now despite himself. "You move," he said, and I pulled the trigger. Margaret met his gaze. "On who?" Silence. The question hung there, brutal and precise. Because he knew the answer. Because everyone did. Cross lowered the gun an inch. That was enough. Margaret moved. Not fast, certain. Toward the cockpit. Toward the truth she had been running from. Toward a choice that would burn the last of her quiet life to ash. Behind her, the cabin held its breath. And Daniel Cross, for the first time since this began, realized he was no longer in control of what came next. The cockpit door felt heavier than it looked, not because of the reinforced frame or the lock, but because of everything waiting on the other side of it. Margaret stood there for a fraction of a second, palm hovering inches from the metal, listening. The uneven breathing, the warning chime pulsing softly like a failing heartbeat. The aircraft no longer flying forward so much as being negotiated through the air. "Open it!" Cross snapped behind her. Margaret didn't turn. "If you rush this," she said, "he dies." Another hesitation, shorter this time. Cross gestured sharply. The older hijacker unlocked the door. The smell hit first. Blood, hot electronics, sweat. Dr. Morris looked up from the captain, eyes red-rimmed, hands slick. Relief flickered across his face when he saw Margaret. Then confusion. "Who?" "She's with us," Cross said. It was a lie that suited him for now. Margaret stepped in, and the world narrowed to instruments and sound. Altitude bleeding off, airspeed wavering. The captain's skin was grey, lips tinged blue. The first officer sat rigid, knuckles white on the yoke, eyes glassy with overload. "I need help," he said hoarsely. "I can't do this alone." Margaret moved without asking permission. She slipped into the jump seat, hands hovering just above the controls, not touching yet. She read the panel in a heartbeat. Older model, familiar enough. Different layout, same language. "When did he lose consciousness?" she asked. 10 minutes ago, Morris said. "Maybe more." Margaret nodded once. "He's hypoxic." Cross bristled. "Can you land this plane?" "I can help him land it," she said, eyes never leaving the instruments. "There's a difference." The first officer swallowed. "Who are you?" "Someone who doesn't want you to carry this alone," she said. "Follow my voice." Behind them, Cross watched, jaw tight. This was not the leverage he wanted. This was surrender, dressed as necessity. "Trim," Margaret said, gently. "Don't fight it." The aircraft steadied slightly. Not safe, but better. In the cabin, the shift was immediate. People felt it, the pitch change, the easing of the roll.
Murmurs spread, cautious, hopeful. Harold Benton sat back down slowly, breath trembling. Thomas Reed closed his eyes, pain radiating through his side, a bitter smile ghosting his lips. Whatever happened next, the woman up front had chosen. The younger hijacker paced near the cockpit, blade clutched tight. "This is stupid," he hissed. "We had control." Cross didn't answer. He was watching Margaret's hands, the way they hovered, the way she spoke. This was not performance. This was muscle memory reclaiming ground. "Fuel balance," Margaret said. "You're compensating too late." The first officer adjusted. The plane responded. Cross felt something cold settle in his gut. This was the point of no return. If she succeeded, his story collapsed. If she failed, his name would be carved into headlines alongside wreckage. "You're risking everything," he said. Margaret finally looked at him. Just once. "So are you." An alarm chirped. Morris flinched. "Ignore it," Margaret said, "for now." The younger hijacker stepped forward. "Enough," he snapped. "We end this." He raised the blade. Cross didn't stop him fast enough. Margaret moved, not toward the weapon, toward the captain. Her hand slammed the oxygen mask over his face, cranking the flow. "Stay with me," she said quietly, not knowing if he could hear. The younger hijacker lunged. Cross shouted his name too late. The first officer yelled. The plane lurched. Margaret's elbow came up instinctively, catching the man's wrist, knocking the blade sideways. The impact rattled through the cockpit. The younger hijacker stumbled back, shock flashing across his face. Cross drew his gun, breath ragged now. Control had shattered. There was no putting it back together. "Stop," Margaret said. Not loud, absolute. Something in her voice cut through the chaos. The younger hijacker froze. Cross hesitated. The captain coughed. A wet, horrible sound. His chest rose. Morris stared. "He's breathing." Margaret didn't smile. Barely. The plane stabilized another degree. Enough to matter. Cross lowered the gun an inch. Then another. The weight of the situation pressed in, undeniable now. This was no longer a negotiation. It was a rescue unfolding against his will. Sirens were already being planned on the ground. Jets rerouted. Chains of command waking up. Cross backed away slowly, eyes never leaving Margaret. "This isn't over," he said. She didn't answer. She was watching the horizon line, steadying it, holding it together with experience bought at a terrible price. In the cabin, the murmurs grew louder. Not panic now. Belief. Fragile. Dangerous. Alive. Margaret Ellis sat in the jump seat of a civilian aircraft with hijackers behind her, a dying man beside her, and nearly 200 lives depending on decisions she had sworn she would never make again. And she did it anyway. Because some things, once learned, never truly leave you. And some calls, once answered, echo forever. The landing was never going to be clean. Margaret knew that the moment she saw the wind readout flicker and settle into something uncooperative. Crosswinds from the west, gusting, the kind that punished hesitation and exposed every weakness in the hands on the controls. "San Diego is out," the first officer said, voice thin. "Runway traffic, emergency backlock." Margaret scanned the display. Her jaw tightened. "We don't need perfect," she said. "We need survivable." Cross hovered near the cockpit door now, no longer commanding, no longer certain. The older hijacker stood back, eyes darting, calculating exits that didn't exist. The younger one had retreated several steps, clutching his wrist, breathing hard, the edge gone from him. Fear had finally found its way in. "Closest alternate," Margaret said. "Imperial County," the first officer replied. "Short runway, Limited services. Margaret nodded once. We can work with that. Cross let out a harsh laugh. You miss, we die. She didn't look at him. You die either way. That shut him up. In the cabin, the shift had fully taken hold. People felt the descent now, the pressure change, the subtle but unmistakable sense of approaching ground. A woman clutched a rosary with white knuckles. A man whispered instructions to his wife like muscle memory from drills he hadn't run in decades. Harold Benton stared straight ahead, breathing slow, the way he'd been taught to keep panic from spreading. Thomas Reed closed his eyes and thought of his daughter's laugh. He didn't pray. He'd done enough of that earlier. Margaret's hands moved with quiet authority now. No wasted motion. She spoke in short bursts, controlled, each word deliberate. The first officer followed her lead without question. He didn't think of her as a hijacked flight attendant anymore. He thought of her as gravity, something solid to orient himself against. Flaps, she said. Not yet. Wait. The plane shuddered, then steadied. Cross felt the cabin obey her before it obeyed him. That realization cut deeper than any threat. He had built his life on control, on bending situations until they fit his will. And here was a woman he had tried to break, now dictating the rhythm of his survival. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance, carried through the air vents as if the aircraft itself could sense what waited below. Runway lights cut through the haze ahead, small and unforgiving. We're high, the first officer said. I know, Margaret replied. Correct gently. Don't chase it. Sweat ran down his temples. He nodded, jaw clenched, trusting her with a faith he didn't have time to question. The younger hijacker slumped into a seat near the front, blade abandoned on the floor. He stared at Margaret like she was something unreal, something that wasn't supposed to exist in his story. Cross lowered himself into a jump seat, gun resting uselessly in his lap. The fight had gone out of him, replaced by something colder. Calculation without leverage. The most dangerous kind. You think this makes you a hero? He said quietly. Margaret didn't respond. You think they'll thank you? He continued. They won't. They'll forget. And you'll carry it anyway. Her eyes never left the horizon. I know. The runway rushed toward them faster than comfort allowed. The plane dropped hard, bounced once, screamed in protest, then settled. Tires shrieked, metal groaned. The deceleration slammed bodies forward against belts and bone. Someone cried out. Someone laughed, hysterical and broken. Margaret held steady through it all, hands firm, breathing even. She rode the violence until it spent itself. The aircraft rolled to a stop in a cloud of burned rubber and silence. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the cabin erupted. Not screams, not cheers. A raw, collective exhale. People cried openly now, hugged strangers, pressed their faces into trembling hands. The sound was messy and human and overwhelming. Margaret slumped back in the jump seat, exhaustion crashing over her like a wave. Her shoulder screamed, her head throbbed. She welcomed it. Pain meant it was over. Sirens grew louder. Footsteps pounded against the fuselage. Commands barked through megaphones. Authority reclaiming space. Cross stood slowly, raising his hands. The older hijacker followed suit. The younger one didn't move until a voice outside shouted again, sharper this time. He flinched, then complied. Margaret stayed seated. The first officer turned to her, eyes wet. You saved us. She shook her head faintly. We saved each other. The cockpit door opened fully now, flooding the space with noise and light. Armed figures filled the doorway, weapons raised, faces taut. They froze when they saw her. A man in a dark jacket stepped forward, insignia subtle but unmistakable. His eyes locked on Margaret's face. Recognition flickered there. Then something heavier. Respect. He didn't salute. He didn't speak her name. He simply nodded, once. And in that small, restrained gesture, Margaret felt the full weight of what she had lost, and what she could never truly leave behind. Because the flight was over, but the reckoning was just beginning. The aftermath did not come with applause. It came with paperwork, questions asked in quiet rooms, and the slow, grinding realization that survival did not mean closure. Margaret sat on the edge of a folding chair inside a temporary command tent. A grey blanket draped over her shoulders she kept forgetting to pull tighter. Her hands were wrapped around a paper cup that had long gone cold. Someone had told her to drink it. She had nodded. She had not taken a sip. Outside, emergency lights washed the night in red and blue, pulsing like an accusation. Across the runway, passengers were being processed in clusters. Some talked too much. Some not at all. A woman cried into the shoulder of a firefighter she had never met. A man stared at his phone, scrolling through messages he couldn't bring himself to answer. Harold Benton sat on the curb with his wife, his arm around her, eyes fixed on nothing. When a paramedic tried to check his vitals, he waved them off. "Check her," he said, voice rough. "She needs it more than I do." Thomas Reed lay on a gurney under bright lights, ribs taped, oxygen hissing softly. Pain etched his face, but his eyes were clear. He watched the chaos with a strange calm, the kind that came after you'd already made peace with worse. When an agent asked him what happened, he answered simply, "A woman did what the rest of us couldn't." Inside the tent, Daniel Cross sat with his hands cuffed in front of him, jacket gone, confidence stripped down to bone. He didn't look at Margaret. He didn't need to. The questions would come later. Lawyers, courts, headlines that would flatten everything into something easier to digest. He had lost control, and he knew it. That knowledge sat heavy and unmoving in his chest. An agent approached Margaret, mid-40s, tired eyes, careful voice. "We're going to need a full statement," he said. "Not tonight, but soon." She nodded. She had expected that. Expected more. "What you did up there," he continued, lowering his voice, "that's going to raise questions." "I know," Margaret said. He hesitated. "You didn't have to get involved the way you did." She looked at him then, really looked. "Yes," she said quietly. "I did." He studied her for a moment, then stepped back. Some arguments weren't worth having. Later, much later, when the runway had emptied and the noise receded into a dull hum, Margaret stood alone near the edge of the tarmac. The aircraft loomed behind her, scarred, silent, alive by a margin so thin it made her stomach twist. She pressed her hand against the cool metal of the fuselage, grounding herself in something real. She felt it now. The cost. Not the bruises, not the blood. The loss of anonymity. The certainty that the quiet life she had built, piece by careful piece, was already unraveling. People would look at her differently now. Some with gratitude, some with suspicion, some with expectations she had no intention of fulfilling. A voice broke the silence. "You flew like you never stopped." She turned. The man who had nodded in the cockpit stood a few feet away now, hands in his pockets, posture relaxed but attentive. He did not introduce himself. He didn't need to. "I stopped," Margaret said, "for a reason." He nodded slowly. "I figured." They stood there for a moment, watching the last emergency vehicle pull away. The night air was cool, sharp, clean. "You know this doesn't end here," he said. "I know. You could let us handle the rest." She almost smiled. "You always do." He studied her, then gave a small, resigned exhale. "If you ever decide you want back in," he said, not finishing the thought. She shook her head. "I didn't come back," she said. I stepped forward. He considered that. Then he nodded again.
Once. Final. When he walked away, Margaret stayed where she was, staring at the dark sky above the runway. Somewhere out there, other planes were flying, other people trusting systems that mostly worked. She hoped they never had to learn how fragile that trust could be. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, and finally let herself feel it all. The fear, the relief, the grief for a version of herself that no longer existed. She had saved lives, and in doing so, she had lost the one thing she had wanted most, to be ordinary. The hangar smelled like oil, cold steel, and old memories that never quite faded. Margaret Hale stood alone beneath the fluorescent lights, her shadow stretched long across the concrete floor as if it belonged to someone taller, someone harder. The door behind her had closed 10 minutes ago. No cameras, no reporters, no applause. Just silence, thick and deliberate. The kind of silence that followed decisions you could never undo. She flexed her left hand slowly. The stitches along her forearm pulled, a quiet reminder that the body always kept its own ledger. Outside, the world was still talking. Panels, headlines, former flight attendant, retired combat pilot, hero, risk, liability. They argued about labels because labels were easier than truth. The truth was simpler and heavier. She had acted, and once you acted, you didn't get to pretend you hadn't. A pair of footsteps echoed from the far end of the hangar. Slow, measured, no urgency. Margaret didn't turn. She didn't need to. "You look like someone waiting for a verdict," the voice said. She exhaled. "I already know what it is." General Robert Collins stopped a few feet away. Late 60s, spine still straight, hair mostly grey but cut close, the way men who never stopped serving wore it even after they technically had. He didn't offer a hand. He didn't need to. Their history didn't require ceremony. "They're calling it a miracle," he said. "They always do," Margaret replied. "Makes it easier to sleep." He studied her profile. The bruising along her jaw was fading to yellow. Her eyes were steady but not untouched. No one walked away from that many lives hanging in the balance without leaving something behind. "You broke protocol," Collins said. "I know." "You ignored 3 direct advisories." "I know." "You assumed control of an aircraft without being on the manifest." She finally turned to face him, and everyone walked off alive. The silence stretched. Collins nodded once. Not agreement. Recognition. "They want to make an example," he said. "Of you or because of you, that's still being debated." Margaret gave a faint smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I was always bad at being invisible." "That was your choice. So was stepping in." He glanced toward the hangar doors, as if the walls themselves might be listening. "There are people who think this ends your quiet life for good." "It already did." "And others," he continued, "who think this is the beginning of something else." Margaret walked past him, boots echoing softly, stopping beside a grounded jet with its nose cone open like a wound under repair. She rested her palm against the metal. Familiar, honest. "I didn't come back for a mission," she said. "I came back because someone needed to be stopped." Collins followed her gaze. "That kind of thinking has consequences." "So does doing nothing," he sighed, the sound carrying more weight than frustration. "You've been offered a civilian commendation, public, clean, no classified strings." "And then what?" she said. "A book deal, a panel circuit, smiling for people who want the danger without the cost." "You could refuse." "I will." Collins studied her carefully now. "There's another option." She didn't respond. She waited. "Advisory role," he said. "Training. Quiet, off the record. You teach crews how to see what others miss,
How to react before panic decides for them. Margaret closed her eyes for a brief moment. Faces flickered behind her eyelids. The child gripping a seatbelt too tight. The mother counting breaths. The man who had nodded once and trusted her without knowing why. "That still puts me back in it," she said. "Yes." "And when it happens again," she said softly, "they'll expect me to step forward." "They already do." She opened her eyes. "Then don't pretend this is about paperwork." Collins held her gaze. "It's about preventing the next one." She turned away, pacing slowly now, each step deliberate. "You know why I left," she said. "I got tired of being the answer to other people's worst days." "And yet," he said, "you were." Margaret stopped. The hangar lights hummed above them, indifferent. "I can't promise I'll stay," she said. "And I won't play cymbal. I won't be rolled out when it's convenient and shelved when it's not." Collins nodded. "I wouldn't insult you by asking." They stood there for a long moment. Two people who understood that duty was never as clean as speeches made it sound. Finally, Margaret reached up and removed the temporary badge clipped to her jacket, turning it over in her hand before pressing it back into her pocket. "I'll think about it," she said. "That's all I'm asking." He turned to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth," he added, "you didn't just save a flight." Margaret didn't respond. She watched him go, the echo of his footsteps fading until the hangar was quiet again. Later, much later, she stepped outside into the night. The air was cold, sharp enough to clear the last of the adrenaline. Somewhere overhead, a commercial jet crossed the sky, lights blinking steadily, carrying people who would never know how close the edge could be. Margaret looked up until it disappeared, then lowered her gaze, feeling the weight settle into something steadier. Purpose didn't announce itself. It waited, patient, relentless. She walked toward her car, not knowing exactly where the road would lead, only that she would meet it head-on when it did. If this story stayed with you, like it, subscribe, and comment 3 words below.